Hey, it's Ryan. Thank you for watching. It's been a little while. I'm working on a lot of projects behind the scenes. And kind of in light of that, I wanted to make a quick video about one of the cameras I'm shooting on. It's a Blackmagic, which I really started kind of my Blackmagic experience on an Ursa Mini 4.6K. There's a couple videos on the channel about that. The camera I'm shooting on right now, however, is the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4K. This project that I'm working on that I can't really talk about right now started off with a lot of the initial photography being done on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera, the original one. And I've recently talked about that a little bit on the channel as well. It's a camera that really irked me at first, but once I solved the problems of the battery and what lens to use on it and just kind of like a basic rigging that made it a little easier and less annoying to use, I really like that camera. Now, a lot of the additional footage in this project I'm working on, which I will get into in a later video, is being done on this camera, which I'm shooting on right now, the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4K. In the past, in the studio, I've had a Sony, an A7S II, even an A6100. Today, here you go, I'll give you a look at this. I'm using the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4K with a Fuel World 4K monitor, and that's what the setup looks like that I'm looking at. The lens on there is a native Micro Four Thirds lens. It's the Panasonic 12-35 2.8, and I really like it. I use a lot of vintage lenses. I use a lot of Canon FD lenses. I've got a myriad of different vintage lenses. However, this lens pairs really nicely with the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. And this video, I just kind of wanted to explain why I use a 4K instead of a 6K. Could have easily picked up the 6K version of this, and the 6K Pro looks great too. I love that it has built-in ND filters. It's really nice. It's a little hulkier than this setup, but the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K is just about the same size as the 4K. So why did I choose the 4K? That's what I wanted to get into in this video and why I like it so much. First of all, as I mentioned, I'm using a native Micro Four Thirds lens, the Panasonic 12-35 f2.8. What's great is this has image stabilization. It hooks right to the camera natively with the Micro Four Thirds mount. There's no need for an adapter or a speed booster or any of that. And with the dual native ISO in the Pocket 4K, it's perfectly acceptable for me. I don't feel like I need a speed booster. Now, if you wanted to add a speed booster to the 4K, it's actually interesting because the crop becomes less than a lot of the crops on the 6K. So there's some interesting things going on here. The 6K looks great, right? But now the 4K got an update. It has that Gen 5 color science that Blackmagic put out. I've got this native Micro Four Thirds lens on it with stabilization. It looks great. It opens up to f2.8, which is really good. And I like that I can just throw these cheaper lenses on there. A lot of the Micro Four Thirds lenses, smaller and cheaper than, their Super 35 or full frame equivalents. So I like the Micro Four Thirds mount. Speaking of the mount, you can adapt a lot more lenses to Micro Four Thirds than you can to Canon EF, which the 6K has. So the Pocket 6K has a Canon EF mount. A lot of people like the Canon EF. I'm not a huge fan. I'm kind of indifferent to it, but unlike a lot of you maybe, I don't have a ton of Canon glass. I never really shot on Canon. I went straight from stills on a Nikon years and years ago, and then shooting video on camcorders and that sort of thing, right into the Sony system and up through the A7S II. And I had always been interested in Blackmagic cameras, but I really, again, didn't move to Blackmagic until the Ursa Mini 4.6K, which I really liked, but it had the Canon EF mount. So I was back to the situation where did I want to buy a bunch of new glass? Because all my vintage lenses, or a lot of them, I couldn't even adapt to Canon EF. So to adapt like a Canon FD lens from, the 60s or 70s, you need to get an adapter with an extra glass element in it. It can be done, but now you're adding extra glass. You're losing quality because usually those adapters don't have the best glass in them. And so because I didn't have Canon photography lenses or any Canon cinema lenses in the EF mount, it was really frustrating going to the EF mount. So I finally bought the Pocket 4K, and the original Pocket, which are both micro 4/3 mounts. And again, with that mount, you can adapt so much glass. I'm using native micro 4/3 lenses right now. The Panasonic one. I also have the Panasonic 35 to 70, I believe it is, 2.8. But that one also a native micro 4/3 lens. But I can also adapt my Canon FD lenses with a simple like $12 adapter. It doesn't have a glass filament. It's literally just an adapter that hooks the lens right to the body. Boom, you're good to go. Same goes with some of my old Russian and Ukrainian lenses and all those, weird lenses that you can get on eBay. You can adapt them so easy to micro 4/3, and that usually isn't the case with Canon EF. So again, I can adapt just a lot more glass to the Pocket 4K. The other thing to take note of with this camera, which some people mentioned when the Pocket 6K came out, when you shoot RAW, you're using the whole sensor. So with the Pocket 6K, you can do 6K RAW, but if you want 4K, you have to shoot in ProRes or, deal with some sort of crop. And it's a lot easier if you want 4K RAW to just shoot on the 4K. And again, if you're worried about the sensor size, the micro 4/3 versus the Super 35, you could always get the speed booster for the Pocket 4K and your crop becomes less than the 6K. Does that make sense? I hope so. Listen to it again and then look it up if that doesn't make sense to you. But so far, the Pocket 4K, I can adapt way more lenses. If I do want to use a speed booster, my crop becomes even less than the 6K. I've got a plethora of micro 4/3 lenses I can use natively, which, they don't have continuous autofocus, but you can do the single shot autofocus, get everything in focus, start recording, and the lens communicates with the body, which is really nice for the native micro 4/3 lenses. The other thing about 6K is the 6K. I feel like 4K is plenty, and a lot of times I'll deliver in 1080p HD. And so to have 4K and a little bit of wiggle room and then, deliver in 1080, that's great. And you've got the 4K to do that. And then with 6K, I guess you've got a little wiggle room to deliver in 4K, but 4K is 4 times 1080 and 8K is 4 times 4K, but 6K is just kind of in the middle. So just a little bit more wiggle room for higher data rates, a lack of 4K RAW. It just didn't make a lot of sense for me. That being said, the 6K is really nice. It shoots really nice footage, and maybe that's, something you'd be into. And if you're going to spend that amount of money, maybe just pony up a few $100 more and get the 6K Pro, because you get the built-in ND filters and just the newest technology overall in the Pocket line. But if you're like me and you want to adapt tons of lenses, you're cool with 4K, plus you want 4K RAW, plus you like that you could use native micro 4/3 lenses plus every other lens, and 4K is plenty for you, then I'd still highly recommend this camera. This is still the best entry-level cinema camera in the world. I will die on that hill, and I don't think a lot of people would argue with that opinion. So just some thoughts on the Pocket Cinema Camera 4K from Blackmagic, and you could always pick up 2 of these for the price of one 6K Pro, maybe 2 used ones for the price of the regular 6K. So that's something else to consider too. And that's exactly what I did. I picked up 2 Pocket 4K bodies. So just some thoughts on this camera. As always, I appreciate you being here with me, Ryan. Hope everything's going great. Hope to share some new projects with you real soon. As always, I appreciate you. I'll see you real soon.